That's work salvation. But in the physical realm, the elements of earth, wind, fire, and water represent, take a look here at the DNA strand, adenine, guanine, cytosine, thymine. You see, fire and water are opposites, so are adenine and thymine. Earth and air are opposites, so are cytosine and guanine. They're opposites. They're meant to be paired together. They're what brings the two strands of your DNA together. That's what that's all about. It's all about what is done in the flesh and how we can make the flesh perform. And Paul referred to them as the weak and beggarly elements. He said, even so we, when we were children, were in bondage under the elements of the world. Notice the language that Paul's, I've said this before, this is all bondage. Because as Crowley found out, if you don't perform it the right way, they're not showing up. And they had him constantly in bondage, trying to get him to perform. Those who are in the New Age movement, they were constantly in bondage to performance in order to get these ascended masters to reveal themselves to him. Bondage. We were in bondage under the elements of the world. Galatians 4:9. But now, after that ye have known God, or rather are known of God, how turn ye again to the weak and beggarly elements, whereunto you desire again to be in bondage? Ye observe days and months and times and years. Are you ready for this? He said that the observations of days, months, times, observers of times, and years is part of the, notice there's 4 of them. Days, months, times, years. Earth, air, fire, water. Adenine, thymine, guanine, cytosine, principalities, powers, rulers of darkness, spiritual wickedness in high places. By the way, see this number 4 that I'm doing like this? Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. That's the real gospel. The real gospel says Christ did it all. The false gospel says, let's bring the force together so it can perform on our behalf. That's false gospel. It's witchcraft. Look at this graphic here. Earth, air, fire, and water. And when you conjure those 4 things together, you get what's called the 5th element. There was a movie, Bruce Willis made this movie, called Ether or Spirit. You bring the 4 together so that something else rises up out of that. We talked about that in the other Jesus. The other gospel brings in, listen, the other gospel brings in the other Jesus. Whereas the real gospel, Jesus is the one who brings the real gospel, not the other way around. The false gospel must bring the other Jesus. Performance works. There are churches taking hold of this theme of the elements. Here's one church called Element Church. Look at that, Element Church. And notice on the bottom, they're actually using the symbols like what you see on an element chart. And then they have the unfinished phrase, Jesus is blank. You know who that is? It's another Jesus, because we don't know who he is. Or maybe you can shape Jesus into what you think you want him to be. That's the other Jesus. And the Element Church preaches another Jesus by way of another Spirit with another gospel. Elements. Earth. Here's another one. Elements City Church. It's all over the place. Here it is. This is from the former denomination I belong to. Elements, Kids, Worship. Here's another one. Elements of Worship. It's all about, see, when they overemphasize worship. I believe in worshiping God. I believe the best way to worship God is get alone somewhere, out in the woods or in a closet somewhere, and just cry and weep and wail, and that way no one's around to see you do it. You're not performing for anybody. You're just so distraught that you can't help yourself, and you're asking God to do it. You're worshiping God as the sovereign God who alone is able to help you, even out of your transgressions. That's worship. But we have taken worship now to a whole new level. Worship now is all about what we can perform or what we can do and make a show of our flesh in order to invoke God. I have spoken to people who had it in their honest heart, their mind, that they believed that they weren't worshiping God well enough. That's why they were having so many problems in their marriage or in their life or whatever. That's a false gospel. That is a gospel where God says, only if you perform well enough for me will I do something for you. It's witchcraft. And it's wrong. Elements Church at Westwood. Notice the symbols. They represent earth, air, fire, and water. Notice you got one rising up out of the middle. This is Elements Church. This is the 4 cardinal directions, the 4 seasons, the 4 elements, the principalities, powers, rulers of darkness, spiritual wickedness in high places. And I've talked about this thing about worship. And some people are believing that unless you worship, God will not do anything for you. Here's an article in a mainstream website, Church Leaders, Lead Better Every Day. Here's an article called Salvation and Worship. You can't have one without the other. Why do many Christians in our churches today fail to outwardly worship God? Why is it that many appear to care nothing about worshiping God? They seem to have other things in their minds during the worship service. You know what this guy's doing? He's putting judgment on everybody. They seem like this. You know what he's doing? He's looking out at a congregation of people that won't perform what he tells them to perform. He has everybody stand up. These people won't stand up. Why won't you stand up? Why do I have to? Well, you're not worshiping. We're worshiping God. How do you know that I'm not worshiping God too? I just want to do it sitting down. Or I don't think I have to throw my hands up in the air. I don't think I have to sway back and forth. I don't think I have to say the same verses 20 times in a row. These people, they have a skewed idea of what worship is, and they're now saying that if you don't worship God the way we tell you to do, you're not saved. It's a false gospel. It is a works-based gospel. Here's Jim Staley. Power of prayer. I'm showing you the graphic. You can listen to the video for yourself to see that he said these words. To conjure up the Lord God, we do so in prayer. And then he said this, when we observe times on Yahweh's calendar, there is something conjured in the spiritual realm. Let me get this back out. This earth, air, fire, and water, these elements, and it's exactly the same thing that Paul said in Galatians, talking about witchcraft. He mentioned the fact, he said you observe days and months and times and years. And he called them the weak and the beggarly elements, thinking that if they performed these things that God would be pleased with them. And I couldn't believe the language that he said. When we observe times on Yahweh's calendar, there is something conjured in the spiritual realm. Oh yeah, I believe there is, but it's not God. Deuteronomy 18:10. I want you to notice the exact language of the King James Bible in relation to what Staley just said. There shall not be found among you any one that maketh his son or his daughter to pass through the fire, or that useth divination, or an observer of times, or an enchanter, or a witch. An observer of times, or a witch. By way of a false gospel that Staley preaches, and Michael Rood especially, he's all about, oh, you got to do the feast days, you got to do this, got to do that. All these guys are telling you that unless you perform these things on these days, God will not hear you. God will not give you grace. God will not give you blessing. It's performance-based. It's witchcraft. It's what it is. I don't like saying things like that, but that's how the Bible lays it out. It's very clear that there are people who are moving in who will try to have you believe that unless you do, you will not be saved. It is a false gospel. Paul called it witchcraft. He called it that for a reason, because there's only two religions in the world. There is gospel, Bible, Christianity, and witchcraft. That unless you do, God will not save you. It's a false gospel. We're going to continue our study next week, going through the book of Galatians, learning what the real gospel is, and showing you the relationship to the fake gospel so that you can know when someone's speaking, when someone's talking, when there's a YouTube video or an article or whatever, you can then discern. You have the tools now in your hand to decide, is this the real gospel that says believe? Or must I do something in order to have a blessing from God? The choice is yours. I'm showing you plainly that devils would love to have you. Don't give in. This is Pastor Mike. God bless you. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.